Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. Some 4,000 Ethiopian troops are pouring into Somalia to join the UN-backed African Union mission in Somalia. This deployment makes Ethiopia the sixth African country to join AMISOM forces since 2007. The mission's principal task is the establishment by the African Union has been to restore peace and stability by battling al-Shabaab militants who continue to maintain a stronghold over rural southern Somalia. This brings the total of African peacekeepers up to 22,000. But al-Shabaab has already vowed to launch a new series of attacks against foreign troops. The last time Ethiopia sent troops into Somalia in 2006, the situation did not improve. So are the prospects better today? Joining me in the studio to discuss these recent developments is Douali Youssef, the Foreign Secretary of the Somalia Unity Council. On Skype, we have James Ferguson, author of The World's Most Dangerous Place, and Mohamed Aluso, a senior Somali political analyst and former government minister and governor of the Central Bank of Somalia. And on the phone, we're joined by Abdi Hakim Yusuf Ayanti, who's director of the Somali Forum for Progress in Mogadishu. But first of all, let's take a look at this report from Tiana Simons.
Last week, Ethiopia sent an additional 4,000 troops to neighbouring Somalia, taking the total number in the African Union peacekeeping force to 22,000. The contingent, known as AMISOM, was first deployed in 2007 by the UN Security Council in order to quell the growing influence of militant group al-Shabaab. Since then, the force, made up of troops from Burundi, Djibouti, Kenya, Sierra Leone, Uganda and now Somalia, has made significant progress in taking back parts of the country previously under the control of al-Shabaab. Speaking last Wednesday, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud said the Somali National Army and AMISOM forces will jointly be conducting these operations to eliminate Shabaab and declare all the territory of Somalia out of the control of al-Shabaab. I don't want to exaggerate, the al-Shabaab threat will be reduced immensely soon, but it will remain for some time. Despite the government push to wipe out the Islamist group, al-Shabaab still continue to experience a high level of support in rural Somalia. There are serious fears that the bringing in of troops from Ethiopia may encourage heightened levels of violence due to a long-standing hatred of Ethiopians by Somalians over a bitter border war in the 1970s. A previous invasion in 2006 by Ethiopian troops led to 16,000 Somalis dead and 1.9 million refugees. As attacks on peacekeeping forces by militants continue throughout the country, it's clear that government progress against al-Shabaab could result in a high civilian cost in the months to come. Tiana Simons, Islam Channel.
Okay, Douali, there's poor history here. The last time an Ethiopian force went in, it massively bolstered the support for al-Shabaab and created the problem that they're supposedly coming in to deal with now. So are the prospects different this time round?
I don't think it's still the same. I mean, it's unfortunate. If I describe what Ethiopian itself is, Ethiopian is a tyrannical wolf in a democratic sheep's cloth, causing suffering and misery to the millions of not Somalians, but the Ethiopian itself. Ethiopia is unreported world, is inaccessible to any report from any part around the world, including the United States or Britain. Ethiopia invaded in 2006 for pretext of in Islamic courts and caused mayhem and destroyed almost 70 or 65,000 Somalians' lives. And it has displaced more than 2.5 million from Mogadishu and destroyed and many houses. What we're saying today is a similar situation in 2006. Ethiopian and Somalian has a long history of enormity because Ethiopia occupied an Ogaden part of Somalia since before the 50s. And if you look today in Ogaden, people are the most suffering people on earth. There are more than 600,000 now in the DAP, and most they come from Ethiopia, suppressed by the Ethiopian regime. One was the leader of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi. Ethiopian coming again in Somalia, it will push to support the Shabaab, and that is going to cause a lot of havoc because of the conflict between two countries.
Okay.
And I think another thing is that...
Just a minute. Let me just get some views from our other guests, and then we'll come back to you. James Ferguson, the first time round when the Ethiopians went in, the Americans backed that. This time they've said to them, isn't there a problem here? What do you think the prospects are?
I think it's different from the last invasion, which was Ethiopia with American backing going solo and going all the way to Mogadishu. They occupied the country, they occupied the capital. This time around, they are coming in under the auspices of the African Union, and they are the sixth country to join that regional effort. So I do think it's actually rather different. I take the point that there's bad history here, and that the problem the last time was that the Ethiopian invasion allowed al-Shabaab to present themselves as a nationalist movement, and was a great recruiting sergeant for al-Shabaab. But let's not forget that this is not the first time that Ethiopia has been back since 2006. They've been coming in and out, operating militarily in the west of the country, around Baidoa and points west of there, for some time. So they've tested the water on this, and there hasn't been a conflagration like there was in 2006 on the back of that. So now they're coming in under the auspices of Amazon. I think that's actually quite a good thing, because this does require a regional solution. It does require the operation of the navy.
Just a second, Dwight. Can I
interrupt you?
No, don't interrupt. Just let him finish the point, and then we'll come back to you. James, yeah, but you know, this is quite. It's a larger deployment now, though, isn't it? Considerably larger deployment.
Yeah, it's bigger, but al-Shabaab is not going away militarily. It seems that AMISOM on their own, the size that it is, the Ugandans on their own with support from Burundians and so on, are not enough to deal with this problem in the south. So it's got to be dealt with now or never. This is the moment to deal with al-Shabaab. There's a kind of momentum behind it. I think that once Kenya came in, I mean, there was originally a rule that said immediate neighbours of Somalia could not take part in AMISOM. The Kenyans were the first to break that rule. They've kind of joined in. Ethiopia, I think, have been very circumspect about this. They've taken their time joining this effort, and in a way, I think it should be welcomed. I think you can look at this. There are two ways of looking at it. I think we should look at on the bright side. I think they do need to be involved.
Okay. Briefly, Duali, you wanted to make a point there. Make it, and then we'll take the other guests as well.
Yes. What I would disagree with James is he said this time is different. I mean, this time will be worse, because what it had done, the Ethiopian, when they invaded in Somalia, is they displaced the 2.5 million, and nobody talks today. And as a Somalian, as a citizens, is it somebody talking about, you know, where our votes is? This is the Somali people. Nobody has given anything to say about the occupation of Ethiopia.
Okay, just let me stop you there, because we're going to have to bring in the other guests, and then we'll be back to you for the rest of the discussion as well. Abdi Hakim, let me just ask you, what do you think the prospects are now? Is it, as James says, a different kind of operation now, part of a broader African Union thing, and that will make the difference? Or will it be seen as part two of the original intervention?
Well, I think first of all, I tend to agree with James, and I slightly disagree with my friend on the studio. I think Ethiopians are coming this time around at a time when there is a near hatred to al-Shabaab, and people are very much, you know, sick and tired of al-Shabaab horror in the country. And also the context is also very different. If you look at the current situation, when al-Shabaab have seen many Somalis as the only or the existential threat to Somalia. So I think it will be coming this time around under the auspices of the EU, and also coming under the some sort of a legal channel. Also, allows Ethiopia to be seen as an alternative to defeat and to overcome the threat that al-Shabaab poses to the country. So I think it will be quite imprudent to say that, this will galvanize al-Shabaab to use as a rallying factor, much as they did in 2006. And I think we also need to look at, in 2006, we had an Ethiopia unilaterally acting, coming to Somalia, and also al-Shabaab was as a nationalist, outfit who are organizing the Somali nationalism feud, and they have built, that sentiment, that nationalistic, feeling against Ethiopians. So I think we are now at a much different position in terms of overcoming the challenge Al-Shabaab.
Okay, Abdi Hakim, let me just stop you there because I want also to get Mohammed Elusu's first view on this about whether this deployment will work or will we see, as Al-Shabaab have threatened, a renewed bout of resistance here?
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Let me say that, the purpose of Ethiopia now joining AMISOM or African Union forces is not only limited to defeat Al-Shabaab. This intervention has, multi-purposes. One is just always to keep, Ethiopia as a gatekeeper of Somalia. Secondly, to delegitimize or, to, weaken the legitimacy of the federal government, and even to strengthen the diplomatic power of Ethiopia. Because, this strategy of intervention right now is to frustrate the new international approach for Somalia, following the UN mission in Somalia and the New Deal in Somalia. So the purpose now of Ethiopia is not just to defeat or change, the peace situation in Somalia. It's just to always control and shape the future of Somalia. And given that the international community has given now space, the African Union, it wants now to, dominate that arena or that sphere of political decision-making process. Even before now, always the Ethiopian forces were in the country. They can cross the border every time they want it. So there will not be any, maybe a little bit slowed or the Al-Shabaab forces, but it will create a new host of problems in terms of humanitarian, in terms of politics, in terms of economics, in terms of military.
Okay.
Even the international community did not allow the Somali forces to fight, to train, to be trained, armed, and defeat Al-Shabaab. So,
okay, Mohammed, let me just stop you there because I'd like to put some of those points to James Ferguson. I mean, James, that's a pretty strong alternative view from somebody who's been a government minister in Somalia, who's saying no, this is something which is to do with an Ethiopian power play and a kind of sharp end of an international intervention here.
Well, I mean, I hear the suspicion of Ethiopia. It's a common narrative thread. It's been going on for a long time, and it's unfortunate in a way there's no Ethiopian on this program who can answer for what Ethiopia really intends to do in Somalia. I agree that if they were to do the same as they did the last time in 2006, it would be a complete disaster. You do not want Ethiopia militarily kind of going right the way over to the east coast and occupying Mogadishu. It would be a complete catastrophe. But I think that is something slightly different from, we don't actually know what they're planning to do. I would assume that they're kind of carrying on what they were doing before, which is operating in the west of the country along the Ethiopian border, which you could argue they have a perfect right to do. They do, after all, have a Somali majority in the Ogaden region. They have a vested interest in security for their own purposes within Somalia. So it isn't necessarily about trying to extend Ethiopian hegemony all over the region, which of course is what we always hear from Somalis. I think it is possible to have their own legitimate interest in the country under the umbrella of AMISOM.
Do you think that the situation is that the need for another 4,000 troops shows that the original mission is actually failing?
Absolutely, it will be failing. And as also said, I mean, Ethiopia have a plan, and its purpose is to conquer Somalia and to divide Somalia into regions, and then it can conquer. There is many regions now has been set up for many reasons. Another thing is, who created Al-Shabaab? Is the invasion of Ethiopia, and Al-Shabaab was not exist. There was no Al-Qaeda in Somalia, but Somalia is becoming a repressed nation. I mean, using international community by Ethiopians and the Kenyans, and the Somalians are a Muslim nation. We cannot accept those troops coming and harassing and killing our people in the name of terrorism. What Ethiopia now, in Ethiopia, there is an terrorism declaration, which is to maintain a political control in Ethiopia. That's what they wanted to do in Somalia. Anybody talks about the invasion of Ethiopia is being labeled as a terrorist, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, and this is another problem. Another thing we want to tell to the international community, you know, unless Somalia decides...
Just let me ask you a supplementary question there. What do you make of the other countries that are already part of the African Union force here? Because I guess James Ferguson's point is that this is what makes the difference, that they're joining a broader force now.
Absolutely. We declare all of them. I mean, Somalia, as we see as a Somalian, Somalia is under trusteeship. The government cannot move out from the villa in Somalia. The president even condemned to the Ethiopian, and he said Ethiopia was illegal in Somalia now. Ethiopia was operating more than 23 years in Somalia. Not now, you know, they are not arriving now. So they did what they want to do. They want to destroy Somalia and always undermine Somali government. You know, the Somali government are trying to build its army. Where is the Somali army? Ethiopians are...
Let me just ask Mohamed Aluso about this question as well. Mohamed, what do you make of this? Do you think that the addition of Ethiopian forces to the African Union forces will undermine their credibility?
Absolutely. You know, there are, let me say first, you know, the security issue of Ethiopia and Al-Shabaab should not be at the expense of the whole future of Somalia. And, you know, because even if Ethiopia has the right to protect its security, even Somalia has the right, or Somalis have the right to protect their future and life. And I think there must be given priority to the Somalis' interest rather than, you know, only the security. Al-Shabaab, it's a serious problem, it's a serious threat, but the international community is not interested in, you know, helping the Somali forces in order to defeat quickly and locally. Even now, the successes achieved by AMISOM, like Uganda and Burundi, are now stalled because there is no involvement of the local population, of the local leaders. There is no ownership. There is no local people. And I don't think, you know, the experiences that we have the occupation of Ethiopia in the district of Beledweyne, where they stationed it for a long time, you know, there was a day and night curfew. There was no access to water of the population. There was continuous, you know, killing, indiscriminate killing of the people. So the people, they could not even, you know, live the daily life. They lost their livelihood during the occupation of Ethiopia before it was replaced by the Djiboutian forces. So there are a lot of experience, even just less than 6 months ago, before they, you know, left Beledweyne district. So I think the people, the Somali people, has a legitimate concern about the involvement of Ethiopia in this mission,
okay.
African mission.
Okay, let me put that point then to Abdi Hakim. I mean, do you think perhaps that the situation is here that even if Ethiopian forces were entering the country with the best will in the world, the previous history means that the whole AMISOM force will be undermined politically by their presence?
I think, first of all, let me just say something before I comment on that. I think what we need to do first is that we need to understand here that, you know, Ethiopia is now in a much different situation. I mean, in comparison with 2006, despite the fact that, you know, the fear that history will repeat itself in 2006 again is still legitimate. And I don't want to dispute that. But what I want to say, however, is that, I mean, this time Ethiopia is operating in Somalia under a very, on a very narrowed, well-defined operation, which is just to defeat Al-Shabaab. Unlike 2006, where we had Ethiopia operating in Somalia without any defined operation, without any objectives, and unilaterally intervene.
Okay, Abdi Hakim, I'm just going to have to stop you there because the line's breaking up a little bit. Let me turn to James Ferguson. James, why do you think it is that this time the Americans are almost said to the Ethiopians, don't do it?
I think there's a lot of nervousness about what happened last time. When it did backfire, American covert support, and maybe not so covert for Ethiopia in 2006-07 had a disastrous effect. So they are worried that by getting involved with AMISOM, it is going, as you've just said, they're worried that it might undermine the entire AMISOM project. And I think that would be a great tragedy, because AMISOM's achievements against al-Shabaab, particularly Ugandans, the Burundians, huge sacrifices made, and they have created the space for the Somali government for the first time in many, many years to try and get back on their feet. So if the entire AMISOM project were to go south because Ethiopia is joining in, it would be an awful thing. It would be a step backwards. And of course, America are nervous about that.
Well, as we saw, there was an American attack which killed an al-Shabaab commander only a few days past, and continued operations by the Americans. Do you think that those two things going on in tandem are liable to reinforce that view that this is a second edition of the 2006-2007 deployment?
Well, I think there must be a worry. I mean, the drone program is controversial in Somalia, as it is in Yemen and everywhere else, and it's not as advanced. There aren't as many drone attacks in Somalia as there are in other places, but it plays back. They're very sensitive, the Americans, now to public opinion after what happened last time. So yes, in that sense, yes.
Okay. Well, we're just going to have to leave it there because we're coming towards the end of the first part of the programme. But after the break, do rejoin us, because we'll be looking at the impact on the humanitarian crisis in Somalia of this new deployment. That's after the break.